G'day folks, I'm just narrowing in on the air in the fuel system problem with the Mercedes ML270cdi. As you can see, I've made access to the fuel tank. Initially I thought I had to drop the tank because this was already just partly pre-pressed but not cut out, but as it turns out it's actually just glued into place. It was the metal, wherever it went, sheet metal cover, that one there. You've basically just got to peel it off. It's not the easiest job and it's not going to be neat getting it back on again, but it gives you access to the top of the tank. And these fittings here were quite loose, like they weren't sealing very well, if at all. I've also got the pickup assembly out for testing. I'm going to put that in a tub with a lift pump attached to it and just draw fuel through it, pump fuel through it, looking for any bubbles. I'll run it for quite a while and just see what it does. But yeah, it also gives me a good chance to clean everything up. As you can see, the gap between two seats, there's some nastiness. I cleaned a lot of human slime out of this car when I got it, but it's got a long way more to go. I need to get a steam cleaner in and do the carpets. She's done a lot of touring around Australia. There was a tremendous amount of dirt and stuff built up around the cap. A lot of dirt road debris. So yeah, that and vibration from dirt roads probably cracked something. I've got to find the other end of these flexible lines, which should be down here. It should be under that plastic cover there. That all comes out and you can see the lines go straight up and diagonally, because there are steel lines along the chassis, but wherever these go to, there'll be more of these push fittings. Since they aren't showing signs of fuel leakage down there, I doubt the leak's down there, but I'm going to change them anyway. I've got some of those green oil tolerant O-rings that are also used for air conditioning. I've been told they work, but I'll double check that and buy the appropriate ones if necessary. Yeah, I had to remove the passenger side rear seat assembly, which is a very solid, heavy piece of equipment. It weighs a lot more than I do, and it was very difficult to get out on my own, but it's out. I also noticed when I was taking it out, one of the gas lift rams to help raise and lower it's actually snapped its little ball stud off, but it's all there. It's just one very heavy assembly with a lot of Loctited bolts, all those. They put a lot of Loctite on. I normally love Loctite, but you learn to hate it when you have to take one of these out. Everything is thoroughly secured and very heavy. They didn't mess around with it. Okay, so that's the fuel pickup assembly and fuel gauge assembly. You can see there's a float arm and a potentiometer or a wiper there. So that has to remain intact. So obviously be very careful of it, I mean. That should be return. It's going to the bottom of the tank down there, and this acts as a little surge tank. So even if the fuel level's low and it surges, there's a little check valve in there, a little flapper valve, that will keep a level of fuel in here at all times, even if the vehicle's suddenly surging back and forth. You don't starve the fuel system. So it's pretty well designed. It looks almost identical, if not completely identical, to the petrol EFI system, except there's no fuel pump in there. There's just a pickup going down to a screen down there. You can see that little thing there. It looks like a strainer, or is a strainer. That's about it. There's no pump in these tanks. It's all at the front of the camshaft on the engine. So what I plan to do is drop this in a plastic tub full of a bit of diesel, let it fill up, and just run I've got a 5 psi diesel lift pump from a truck. I'm just going to run that on it through a clear hose and just see if any bubbles appear. If bubbles start appearing, it means this old hose here is degraded or something like that, or there's a crack in this housing. These are not expensive to buy. They are all over eBay. They're the same as the petrol model. You just change a few things inside it and it can be done. But if it's only a PVC or rubber hose that's gone bad, I'll repair it myself. But to be honest, it doesn't look like there are any cracks, and there was certainly no fuel in here when I vacuumed all the dirt out. And this was almost 3/4 full with gravel and dirt. The extra 2 pins on this plug are for the fuel pump. You can see the whole thing's designed for both models. The tank's probably identical. that there would be a return. It allows heated overflow fuel from the fuel rail to come back and just disperse a bit of extra heat with the what's in the tank before it gets picked up again. So we've got return and outlet, suction side, and I'm going to set up a little test and run this thing. If I can rule this out as a leak point, I'll basically go down to either the fittings that are on here or the fittings between here and the steel rails or the steel lines on the chassis. And that should do it, because I've already done the engine bay parts. I've redone the line from the steel lines on the chassis to the engine itself, and I've done the one from the fuel to water heat exchanger to the fuel filter, because I was seeing air bubbles in that clear hose, and I've remade that with rubber multi-fuel hose. No change. So yeah, and I've even bypassed the fuel cooler itself to make sure it's not leaking, and there's still no change. There's still bubbles coming through. And that was drawing straight from the tank to the fuel filter, still bubbles. So it's just a trial and error thing, and we should get somewhere. Okay, well, just running off the suction side, I'm not getting any air through it. I do get the occasional bubble through the lift pump, but that hasn't been used in probably a decade or more, so it's probably still working itself out. But it's working just fine. You can see a tiny bit of foam come through there, but it's not actually coming from the suction side. That line stays solid all the time. The air could be coming from here. That's not the best fit. But I'm not concerned about that side of it. I'm only concerned about what's coming out of here. And it's working fine. I'll do a few more tests and things and just see what it does. At least wiggle tests, things like that. I'll put another spade on the on that terminal there, hook it up permanently, and just poke and prod things just to see if it's going to leak. But I've got a feeling it was these loose O-rings on top. It was worth pulling this out anyway. I can see the condition of it and all that sort of thing, make sure it's alright. I'm also going to hook this up to the return line and make sure there's no crossing over. Not that there should be, because it's all one separate line. I just don't know what this other black hose is, whether it's designed to sample back to the inlet there or not. I should probably even remove that. There's no point in it being there. Don't know. Maybe it's supposed to dump some of it back to tank and then overfill this thing. Could be a possibility. I don't want to tamper with it too much, but I'd be tempted to remove it, to be honest. Ah, I see. There, that black line does not need to be removed. It's returning most of the spill back to the tank. I mean, even lifting it up, the level doesn't seem to drop. Maybe a little bit. If I let it cover up on the bottom of the tank, it will overflow a bit more, but it seems that it's designed to keep this surge tank full, and that's about it. Keeps the tank full, probably returns some of it to tank, but that's about it. It's that, or it's some kind of Venturi effect. Maybe the spill has to go through a Venturi and draw even more fuel up from the bottom of the tank and mix with the cold stuff. Either way, it's can't be modified without seriously harming the system, but overall I'm not seeing any air bubbles. And even wiggling the old hoses and things like that, there's nothing coming through the lines, so I'd say my problem's just the fittings on the tank. These fittings here, the snap-on fittings. You gotta love the virtually no flammability of diesel, at least no explosive vapor potential. You can work with it just like you would water. Mind you, it doesn't evaporate like water, and I wouldn't make a mess on the floor, but it's not as harmful as you think. It's actually quite safe. If it was petrol, I'd be concerned. If it was petrol, I'd probably just go out and buy a new assembly and be done with it. Okay, so assembly's back in place, but the fun part, there's actually 2 O-rings in each fitting, and they're both different sizes. This smaller one here, which must be the return, or is the return, has 2 smaller O-rings. One's a nice blue soft one, the other's a probably the same material, I don't know. No, that's definitely much harder. That's on the suction side too. That one's gone hard. That one's definitely not all that good either. So the dual O-ring's not so happy anymore. I'm going to clean these fittings out and fit some new ones. I don't have OEM O-rings. I'm going to use some refrigeration grade ones, which are designed for high temperature, high pressure oil and refrigerant. And yeah, just made a bit of a pick out of some 316 stainless TIG wire. Just pick them out of the sockets. Okay, after much messing around and swapping O-rings, I'm still getting air in the system, and I've found sort of right under here the other ends of these lines, and they also have these little snap-on fittings. Unfortunately, they're almost impossible to get to without dropping the fuel tank. So I'm going to do what I should have done to begin with and rerun this line. Just rerun it. I'll either run the whole thing in 3/8 copper, or I will make a right angle bend, reattach to the fuel tank itself, and just run a flexible rubber hose, multi-fuel hose, sort of down to about here. I'll cut the existing steel line that runs down the chassis rail and attach my own rubber hose, because there's a major problem with the plastic line going from the tank to the steel lines on the chassis. The return I'm not concerned about, that doesn't leak. All the fuel you see there is just from me disconnecting this one a few times and just swapping O-rings for different fatter ones and smaller ones. Doesn't make any difference. So I'm going to hose clamp onto the tank with a right angle bend and come straight off with some flexible rubber hose to either a straight run of 3/8 copper refrigeration line all the way to the engine, or I will if I can find a suitable place to do it, I'll just cut and shut the main fuel line on the chassis, which is probably the easiest way to do it. I'll just run some I'll run some 6mm or 8mm flexible multi-fuel hose. Thanks for watching.